Hello, dear students. I welcome you all on behalf of Sri Jayendra Ranjan classes. Dear students, we are in a continuation of the chapter that is the reproduction in organism. In previous few lectures, we have completed the lifespan and asexual reproduction, and in asexual reproduction, we have also discussed about the vegetative reproduction. And in vegetative reproduction, the several means of natural vegetative propagation and artificial or man-made vegetative propagation we have discussed. Now it is time to talk about sexual reproduction. So in this chapter, we are going to discuss today about the sexual reproduction. So we have already studied the difference between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Then also we have to note down some of the important things with respect to that while studying this in detail. As you know that sexual reproduction involves the formation of gamete as well as fusion of gametes. And when gametes get fused, they are going to form a zygote. Later on, the mitotic division will happen in case of zygote and that will develop into the new organism. So if we want to study this whole event which is coming in the sexual reproduction, we have to deal all the phases in detail. Now here you can see that this is a particularly a female and this is a male. They are producing the male gamete and the female gamete. They are getting fused. Fertilization is occurring. Zygote is forming, and later on embryo will form. As you can see here, 23 chromosomes are there. Here also 23 chromosomes are there. But in zygote, the 46 chromosomes are formed as a 23 pairs are there, and that will form embryo by the mitosis. So in embryo also each cell has a 46 chromosome in 23 pairs. This diagram is showing the particular parts of the flower, and in parts of the flower, this is the gynoecium. This gynoecium has a stigma, style, and ovary, and within ovary you will find the presence of ovules. Whereas if you talk about the stamen, in stamen you will see the formation of pollen grain within the sac-like structure which are known as microsporangium, and about which already we have discussed. Then this is the anther and this is the filament and this is the male reproductive part, that is nothing but a stamen or androecium. So for plant, the sexual reproduction, the flower is necessary. Okay. Now, if we talk about characteristic of sexual reproduction, we come to know that two fusing gametes can be produced by the same individual or by different individual. Means it is possible that usually male and female gametes in sexual reproduction are produced by the two different individuals, but sometimes by the same individual as well. So we have studied already that it can be both uniparental as well as biparental, but mostly it is biparental. Then offspring produced are not identical to the parent, because in sexual reproduction, during the formation of gametes, meiosis occurs. And I hope you know that in meiosis, the crossing over or recombination occurs. And during this crossing over or recombination, the exchange of genetic material occurs, and that leads to the development of variation. So the offspring produced are formed by the fusion of gametes which has already undergone through the change or the recombination, and if they are fusing, they are not going to develop identical offspring to the parent. So here, not identical parents, identical to the parents. Offspring are not identical to the parents, and it will involve meiosis as well as syngamy. It involves meiosis as well as syngamy. Syngamy is the fertilization, fusion of male and female gamete. Whereas in asexual reproduction, we have studied that there is no meiosis, there is no fertilization. Apart from this sexual reproduction is a slow process, it is elaborate process, it is taking time, it is in detail, it has different phases, so it is also considered as a complex process. And so it is considered that multiplication is not rapid in case of these plants. Multiplication is not so rapid, it is a slow process. So now in sexual reproduction, we have to discuss the phases of life cycle. And if we talk about the phases of life cycle, the phases of life cycle which we are going to study, The phases in organism life cycle are three. First is juvenile phase, second is reproductive phase, and third is the senescent phase. So three phases are there: juvenile, reproductive, and senescent. So if we take any organism after birth, it is immature, it is in a childhood, it is in a developing phase, and it has not attained the reproductive maturity. Till that time period, that particular organism is under a juvenile phase. But whenever they attain the reproductive maturity or a capability to give birth to the young ones, they have reached to the what a reproductive phase. They have attained the maturity of reproduction. And after reproductive phase, attaining reproductive phase, they will reproduce, they will produce the offspring. And after a certain years of age, you will find that this organism is going to die, and before death, you will fade, you will see some of the deteriorative changes, and that deteriorative or negative or body changes are a part of senescent phase. Okay, so first, we talk about the juvenile phase in detail. Now, when we talk about the juvenile phase, this is the vegetative phase as well, or we can say it is a pre-reproductive phase. It is, we can say it is a particularly pre-reproductive phase. And in this phase, during juvenile phase or vegetative phase, the organism will show growth so that it can attain a certain maturity. It usually a growth phase during which organism show the growth and it try to attain the maturity to perform a sexual reproduction. But here they have not developed the capacity of reproduction. And this juvenile phase is of variable duration in different organisms. It is of variable duration in different organisms. Means it can be short in some organism, it can be long in case of the other organism. It is specifically known as vegetative phase in case of plant. So these are some of the examples who are growing and they are in the juvenile phase. After juvenile phase, the reproductive phase is found. And the reproductive phase is the phase where they attain the reproductive maturity. And here, the reproductive organ develop and mature in this phase. So reproductive are going to develop here in a very well manner and they are going to mature. In the higher plant, during reproductive phase, it is known that there is a formation of a reproductive called structure. Reproductive structure, that is a flower. Specifically in angiosperm, this flower formation occurs during the reproductive event. And you can see this is the flower, which particularly a structure which is formed in the reproductive phase of angiosperms. And they have reproductive structures. The motto of this reproductive phase is to produce the offspring, is produced to give birth to the young ones, and the young ones may be similar or dissimilar to the parental generation because variation is there. Now, this phase has a variable duration in different organisms. Here also this reproductive phase is variable in different organisms. It can be short, it can be long. But based upon the flowering and fruiting pattern, was based upon the flowering, how they flower and how they produce the fruit. There are two types of flowering plants. One is monocarpic and one is polycarpic. Now this, based on the flowering and fruiting pattern, sometimes you will get a question like this, that the flowering plants are classified into monocarpic and polycarpic based on which characteristics. So you should remember flowering and fruiting both. Now we have to understand what is monocarpic and polycarpic. So let's understand that. First we are going to talk about the monocarpic plant. Now, monocarpic plant are those plants which flower only once in their life. These monocarpic are particularly They are the plants which flower only once in their lifetime. And after flowering, this flower help to develop the fruit, and after formation of fruit, that plant is going to die. Okay, so only single time flowering occur in a whole lifespan in case of monocarpic. Okay, now, so the question is, which are the monocarpic plant which flower only once? So if we take about some of the annuals, all annuals usually are monocarpic like wheat, rice, and maize, and some biennials are also there like radish and carrot. And biennials are those who has a particular lifespan of, they complete their lifespan within 2 years. Now, if you talk about the annual, in annual you can also write example of marigold. Here we can take another example of marigold as well. And in biennial, if we talk, we can take an example of henbane as well. So these all are monocarpic, means they are going to flower only once. So usually the annuals and biennials are monocarpic. But few perennial plant like bamboo species and agave are monocarpic as well. So now the question is, what is the difference between annual, biennial and perennial? Annual is those plants which flower within the 1 year and complete their lifespan within 1 year. Biennial are those plants which complete their lifespan within the 2 years. And perennial are those organisms whose lifespan is of many years. So few perennial plants are also monocarpic, like bamboo species. And again, apart from this, the question which we have just discussed and answered, what is annual plant? So annual plant is a plant that completes its life cycle from germination to the production of seed within 1 year and then dies. So it is annual. It is only 1 year lifespan is that. But the question is, what is biennial? Biennial plant is a flowering plant that takes 2 years to complete the biological life cycle. It completes the life cycle within the 2 years. And the perennial are those whose life cycle can be completed in by the many years. So if we take some of the examples then of annual plant, these are particularly maize, wheat, we have discussed already, and that you know very well. Now after this annual plant, we are going to talk about some of the biennial plant like wheat, cabbage is there. They are also particularly biennial. A few perennial plants are also monocarpic. Perennial, whose lifespan is of many years. Monocarpic means they are going to flower only once in their lifespan. So if we take example, the first example is of certain bamboo species. It is known that certain bamboo species flower after 50 to 100 years. They flower after 50 to 100 years. Means they are not going to flower up to the 50 to 100 years. At the end, it is going to flower. So the vegetative period is of long time. So this is the bamboo species. Another agave is also there, which flower generally 10 to 30 years. After 10 to 30 years, this agave also get flowering. And after flowering, this all show the fruiting and they die. Now, if we talk about some of the bamboo species, we can write some of the name of the bamboo species. And in bamboo species, we are going to write some of the examples. And in that, one of the known example of bamboo species is Bambusa tulda. And apart from this, another is Melocena. Melocena. bamboosоидals. Bamboosоидals. So Melocanna bamboosоидals is the another bamboo species, and this bamboo species flower at the end of 50 to 100 years, means they are live vegetatively for 50 to 100 years. After this example, another example of monocarpic plant and perennial plant is Strobilanthus kunthiana, which is also known as Nilakranji, and it is known that it flower in every 12 years. It flower in every 12 years. So after 12 years, it will show the flowering, it will show the fruiting, then they are going to die. Now it is known that this is the actually a Strobilanthus kunthiana, blue colored beautiful flowers are found. In the last time it flowered during the September October 2006. Dear students, it is an NCRT data. Now in 2000, after 2006, in 2018 also this flowering has occurred. Okay, but it is NCRT data which was not changed, so it is written last time as a September October 2006. Now after this flowering converted large hilly tracts of Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu into blue stretches that attracted a large number of tourists. So it is found in case of the hilly areas of this particular state, and the name of state also you should remember. Sometimes you get in question. Okay, so this is the particular thing about the monocarpic plant, which flower only once. And we have studied that they came in what? Annual, biennial, and few perennial. Now we are going to talk about the polycarpic plant. And in polycarpic plant, there are a perennial plant which after reaching maturity, which after reaching maturity, flower repeatedly at intervals. They flower repeatedly at intervals. Okay. So their lifespan is of many years, but the flowering occur many times. So this polycarpic plant are mango, apple, jackfruit, grapevine, orange. As you can see, the mango which is normally observed in mango, you know that what happens? It is a woody plant and its lifespan is so many years. But in every summer you will get a flowering because of this. The mango fruit is obtained in every summer, but they are not going to die. So if they show many times flowering, then that is known as polycarpic plant. You can see this is the mango, apple, jackfruit, grapevine, and orange. These all are the polycarpic plants. Now in this polycarpic, I want to make you to understand some more thing. Suppose I have planted this seed here. This is vegetative phase. Then it showed flowering here. Then this is another phase. Then it showed flowering. This is some more time and it showed flowering. Now this phase is known as interflowering period or recovery phase. So the particular time period between the two flowering is known as interflowering period. Now this is vegetative period. But when once flowering occur, then this whole part become a part of reproductive phase or vegetative phase. So interflowering period is a part of reproductive phase. It is a part of reproductive phase. And during this interflowering period, plant try to capture the nutrients which are required, hormones which are required for the what of flowering. So this time they attain the particular another This is one of the important period between the two flowering, which is used for the building of resources. Okay, and it is not a part of juvenile phase, but it's a part of mature phase or the reproductive phase. Okay, so I hope you have understood about this particular one. Very few perennial plants bear a flower throughout the year. That is like China rose. China rose is a flower which we also call a hibiscus rosa sinensis. In this flowering occur throughout the year. This is the and the period between the two flowering phases known as interflowering period. It is not the juvenile phase, it is the mature phase that we have discussed. The reproductive phase is variable duration in different organisms that we have discussed. In hormones in plants, hormones are responsible for actually the sexual reproduction. An interaction between hormone and a certain environmental factor, the interaction between the hormone and certain environmental factor regulate the reproductive process and associated expression. So, how the reproductive process is going to happen, that is dependent on the hormone environmental factor. Now, before studying the events of particular sexual reproduction, we have to talk about the senescent phase. So, the last phase is senescent phase. Now, it is known that it is a post reproductive phase. Means after reproduction has happened, this phase will be achieved. And during this phase, what happens? It involves structural and functional deterioration of body by accumulation of waste metabolite, which ultimately lead to the death. So what happens? Particularly, waste metabolite are going to accumulate within the body. So this body deterioration occur during the senescent phase. Now, after this, in both plant and animals, it is known that hormones are responsible for this transition between these phases. Actually, who is responsible? Hormones are responsible for the transition between these three phases. Interaction between hormone and certain environmental factor regulate this reproductive process as we have discussed. So here, the different phases of reproduction are over. And now we are going to start with the events of sexual reproduction. And in this, we are going to talk about pre fertilization, fertilization, and post fertilization events.